In Western history, scholars constantly wrestle with the Socratic problem, the nearly impossible task of separating the actual living Socrates from the legendary flawless philosopher invented by his students. When we look at ancient Mesoamerica, we face the exact same dilemma. But here, the subject is not a single man, it is an entire empire. And today, we will be talking about the Toltec. For the Mexica, the architects of the Aztec Empire, their legendary ideal was a city called Tolan. In the later imperial records, Tolan was envisioned as an unearthly paradise. It was a metropolis of jade palaces where corn grew to the size of men and where cotton matured on the stalk in brilliant natural colors. The keepers of this paradise were the Toltecs, but Tolan was far more than a set of physical coordinates on a map. It was the ultimate Mesoamerican blueprint for civilization itself. Much like Plato writing about Socrates, the Mexica actively retrofitted their own history to match this idealized past, deliberately marrying into surviving noble lines to claim direct Toltec descent. In classic Nahuatl, the very word Toltecatl evolved from a geographic descriptor into a title of supreme prestige. It meant a master artisan, a scientist, a person of absolute refinement. To possess Toltecness was to possess the divine right to rule. Yet, beneath centuries of imperial propaganda lies a grit and stone reality. To find the true architects of this legacy, we must look past the poetry and interrogate the dirt. Situated in the semi-arid landscape of modern Hidalgo sits the actual capital of the historical Toltec state, Tula. Through the rigorous data compiled within the Oxford Handbook of Mesoamerican Archaeology, scholars have stripped away the layers of later myth. What emerges from the excavations is not a utopian sanctuary, but a highly militaristic, multi-ethnic urban center that dominated central Mexico during the early post-classic period, roughly between 900 and 1150 Common Era. Tula was an empire forged in industry. Archaeological surveys reveal that the city's true power rested on a strict monopoly over the region's green Pachuca obsidian. The historical data details massive state workshops processing thousands of blades and weapons, fueling a vast regional tribute network. At its peak, Tula housed an estimated population of over 50,000 citizens. The physical ruins, the stark geometric pyramids, the complex canal irrigation, and the burned remnants of its civic center tell the story of an aggressive economic powerhouse. The historical Toltecs were not philosophical myths, they were masters of political economy and stone. To understand the Toltec mind, however, one cannot rely on archaeology alone. We must confront their defining paradox, the blurring of historical kingship and cosmic divinity. At the heart of the Toltec memory stands the One Reed, our sacred prince, the feathered serpent. The Epic of Tula is driven by the sacred prince's cosmic tragedy, tricked by his rival deity, the smoking mirror, the god of night and fate. He was driven into disgrace and exile. He fled eastward to the Gulf Coast, where he donned his sacred vestments and immolated himself on a massive funeral pyre. As his ashes scattered, his heart ascended into the heavens, transforming into the morning star. It is a gripping narrative of exile and resurrection, but to modern scholarship, this myth encodes a profound empirical science. In his foundational research on Mesoamerican sacred time, Anthony Aveni demonstrates that for ancient Mexican societies, mythology was the language of empirical observation. The tragic disappearance, 8-day journey, and subsequent celestial rebirth of Quetzalcoatl perfectly mirrors the precise orbital mechanics of the planet Venus. In reality, Venus serves as the evening star, vanishes completely from human sight during its 8-day inferior conjunction beneath the horizon, and then dramatically bursts back into the dawn sky as the brilliant morning star. The Toltecs were mapping the clockwork of the universe. When we examine plates 53 and 54 of the pre-Columbian Codex Borgia, we see this architecture laid bare. This sacred screenfold manuscript tracks the 5 synodic periods of Venus, correlating its orbital cycle with the ritual calendar. The artwork displays the Venus deity piercing various targets with spears at the exact moment the planet emerges from the underworld. By studying the Codex Borgia alongside of Vini's frameworks, we realize the Toltecs used the narrative to preserve a highly accurate mathematical calculation of the cosmos. The intellectual lineage of the Toltecs extended far beyond the stars. It reached deep into the earth because the later Nahua peoples credited the Toltecs with inventing the fundamental structures of civilization. They attributed to them an absolute mastery over biology, botany, and natural medicine. To the indigenous mind, a true doctor was a direct heir to the Toltec tradition of empirical observation. The absolute pinnacle of this traditional botanical wisdom is preserved in an Aztec herbal, the classic Codex of 1552, also known as the Badianis Manuscript. This is the oldest surviving medical text of the Americas. It was composed in Nahuatl by an indigenous physician named Martin de la Cruz and translated into Latin by Juan Badiano at the College of Santa Cruz. While physically compiled in the early colonial era, its scientific foundations reflect centuries of pre-Columbian experimentation, a direct survival of the deep cultural lineage established during the era of Tula. The text reveals a medical system that was highly organized, diagnostic, and deeply integrated with the natural environment. Consider this entry: a remedy prescribed for extreme fatigue and the black hood of the heart. The manuscript dictates a precise botanical compound, combining native plant extracts with crushed minerals to restore equilibrium to the body's vital centers. Other plates detail the usage of specific herbs to alleviate pain, reduce inflammation, and combat aggressive fevers. This was not haphazard folk sorcery. It was a rigorous, systematic classification of pharmacology. By examining the detailed illustrations and precise recipes with an Aztec herbal, we see the practical execution of the Toltec intellectual idea, a science that treated the human body not as separate from nature, but as an extension of the physical and ecological landscape. To truly understand the political rise and fall of this empire, we must turn to the original indigenous histories. The most vital primary source for the Toltec legacy survives in the Codex Chimalpopoca. Recorded in the Nahuatl language, this chronicle provides an unvarnished window into how the indigenous world recorded the golden age of Tula. The Annales describe a civilization of staggering wealth and devotion. The text details Quetzalcoatl meditating in palaces constructed entirely of jade, turquoise, and precious feathers. It establishes the Toltecs as the ultimate purveyors of art, stating that under his reign, nothing was imperfect, and no craft was unknown. Yet the Codex also provides the grim historical reality of Tula's collapse, explicitly records the internal political strife, the factional warfare, and the ultimate shattering of the Toltec state in the late 12th century, driving its people to scatter across Mesoamerica. By reading the Annales, we are reading the genuine political history of Central Mexico's greatest foundational empire. However, physical collapse is not the end of the Toltec story. To see how their shadow loomed over the empires that followed, we turn to the monumental Florentine Codex, in which Book 10 records the direct testimonies of Nahua elders. Their words carry a tone of profound, unshakable reverence. They explicitly confirm that the Toltecs functioned as the classical foundation of the Mesoamerican world. Placing the gritty political history of the Chimalpopoca alongside the cultural reverence of the Florentine Codex bridges the gap between archaeology and memory. It allows us to hear the indigenous voice validating the Toltecs not merely as an archaeological site, but as the supreme source of their own intellectual pride. By looking past the physical collapse of Toltec and tracing their footprint through the sacred geometry of the Codex Borgia, the empirical botanical medicine of an Aztec herbal, and the living memory recorded in the Chimalpopoca and Florentine codices, we arrive at a complete picture of the Toltec state. They were a civilization that harmonized the brutal grit of a regional empire with the soaring heights of cosmic science. They laid the bedrock upon which all subsequent Mexican history was built. By preserving and studying their records, we ensure that the true architects of ancient American wisdom are never left in the shadow of myth. Thank you. It's one of those things where, with all these projects, it keeps leaving me with more questions that I want answered. It's just I don't know how to get them answered right now, and my current situation as a student. I'm not losing my mind. You're losing your mind.